Continue with that, I have an announcement from Tom Rem.
So I'd like to know if we have two people in the audience who would like to have a $65 lunch ticket, Thursday lunch in League City for $10. Anybody? Two people? $65 lunch ticket for $10. If you think you'd like to do this, see me. I'll be sitting right over here. The other thing is that I put on all the tables next year's speaker schedule for our monthly meetings, and just to let you know that what we're going to be talking about next year. A theme next year is going to be global warming solutions, and you'll see 4 of the meetings are going to focus on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Now we have our featured speaker. Is Matt Reisdorf with Fluor. He's going to be talking about seeing engineering ethics in a new way. And he's the process manager of process technology. I'm going to introduce him a little bit later. And this is the recognition for the month. Our YPO is the Young Professional. For October is Johnny Huyn. He's a graduated chemical engineer from the University of Texas in 2015. He has been attending many meetings with the South Texas section. And he is responsible now for the social media. So I don't know, probably he's not here, but please join me in recognizing him with a round of applause. Johnny Huyn. Now we have different recognitions tonight. We have the awards. If you are receiving an award, please come over here so we can provide you with your prize. So we have Matthew Christensen. And we have many papers, best papers judging committee, different winners. We also have QG1, Hugh Duan, Lars Grabo, and Stanko Brankovic. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly, but and we also have Ju Jun Lin, Peng He, Mohamed Tabakoli, Nevin Tundubila. And finally, we have our outstanding young professional, Sheena Reeves. These are the award winners, recipients for this year. If you see them, please then big congratulations to them. Thank you guys for all the hard work that you have been doing. Thank you. Matt Christensen. Thank you. Sheena Reeves. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Okay, this year, 2018, marks the 10th anniversary of the Southwest Process Technology Conference here in the Moody Gardens. We want to thank you, all our volunteers, sponsors, and exhibitors making this event happen. A really great event, great organization. Now, I would like to make an announcement for November. This year marks a special anniversary. Last year, we celebrated the 75th anniversary of the South Texas section. When we turned 75th anniversary, it's called Diamond, and we have this opportunity. We're going to have the Diamond Jubilee celebration. It's going to be on November the 3rd. We're not going to have our regular monthly meeting. We are going to have this special event. It's a once-in-a-generation type of event. You're going to see the next one maybe in 25 years when we turn to the 100th anniversary. It's going to be in the Houston Racquet Club, memorial near Boss. It's going to be a gourmet dinner, live music with a night beat band. If you want to invite your spouse, your wife, husband, girlfriend, boyfriend, please come. This is going to be a very special occasion to have a very nice dinner with excellent music and a very good crowd of chemical engineers. We are going to see the evolution of how chemical engineering has been impacting the South Texas section, especially the Houston area. So please, if you want to sign, there are going to be some flyers downstairs. If you want to get more information about the event, or ask one of the board members for more details. Now, Arctic Technology Conference is coming in November. Please come, especially you are working in that part of the world. We're going to have November elections, 2018, but it's not the country elections. It's going to be our chapter elections. So please be ready. We're going to send the information via online, via email. So we expect everybody's participation. In November, the 1st of November, since we don't have our regular monthly meeting, we're going to have something called the Water Forum. This Water Forum is going to be a series of workshops that are going to run through the afternoon from 4 to 6. It's going to be on the east part of town at the Chaffee Hall and Garden on Federal Road. Vincent Torres is the organizer for this event. He's going to come here tomorrow. In case you want to ask more details directly to him, he's going to be the guy. And we have our workshops session. Sanjay is organizing them. Tentative day is going to be November the 29th. And it's going to be at the Trini Mendenhall Community Center. Everybody is invited. There is no charge for these workshops. They are going to be valid for your professional development hours. So it's a good opportunity to learn something new. And finally, we are always looking for volunteers in case you want to join us. Send me an email, stop me by at any point. I'll take your information, or send me grab one of the board members. So we know that you are interested and you are welcome to join us. Okay, going back to our speaker, we have Matt Reisdorf. You know what? I just realized we don't have any slides. Oh.
Okay, there we go.
There we go.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Matt, I'm going to introduce Matt. Matt works with Fluor. He's a senior director and department manager of process technology at this company. He's a licensed chemical engineer. Matt has hands-on experience in process design, in upstream, downstream, and chemical systems. He has led the design activities for both small conceptual studies and large mega projects. He currently manages one of the largest departments of chemical engineering in the country. Graduated from Rice University, he enjoys judging the undergraduate design contest that challenge him as a student. He is involved in design automation and design process improvement activities. His presentation is going to talk about seeing engineering ethics in a new way. This is a unique, thought-provoking, and yes, even entertaining discussion of how engineering ethics is different than you may expect. This PowerPoint presentation covers the ethics, continuing education topics required of many professional engineering boards. Please help me welcome Matt Reisdorf.
Excellent. So thanks. I appreciate the warm welcome. I appreciate the good introduction. I currently serve as the Department Manager of Process Technology for Fluor, which means sometimes I get to be involved in some interesting decisions, like the one I had a couple weeks ago, when we had to decide that James Turner, who was planning to give the talk tonight, due to some urgent business, had to travel to Asia on short notice. Now, I'm well aware of some of the speakers we've had in past years at this forum. After a hard day of work at the conference, we've had people talk about high-speed trains, about space travel, about cybersecurity. And James told me he'd be willing to travel on the condition that I could come here and give a talk on engineering ethics and make it as exciting as traveling through space. Well, my first inclination was to look and see if I could dig up my own passport and if it might still be valid. Because when we think of ethics, we think of it as something that's good for us, that's important, but maybe it's somewhere closer to defensive driving in terms of something that we'd actually want to do as an entertaining evening after a hard day of work like we had today. The way ethics is often presented, especially engineering ethics, is that it's the same as any other ethics. There are some core values, but just with a small engineering twist. You know, don't lie, cheat, or steal. Do not covet thy neighbor's scientific calculator. Do not take Avogadro's number in vain. You know, a few precepts like that. And usually it's coupled with some very general case studies. Crazy things that you never see in the real world that are clearly made up. Studies like, here's Bob. Bob is a happy engineer. He's off doing some nice calculations. When he stumbles into a crime ring, his colleagues are trying to buy used valves out of a salvage yard run by the mafia and sell them as if they're new, pocketing the money. And there's always a question at the end. Should Bob join the crime ring? Yes? No? Well, when presented this way, it's tough to get a lot out of a presentation on ethics. But in my quest to avoid spending 24 hours in an airplane, I found that engineering ethics is a topic of its own, a live, vibrant, unique topic that can really change the way you look, not just at ethics, but at the job that you do every day. And I'd like to take you a bit along that journey as well. But first, a bit of a story. So James sent out a survey to many of you and others in the industry trying to collect some feedback on ethics issues that are present today. And he collected many stories, true stories. I'd like to start with one of those. So this is a true story by a current chemical engineer, a current member of AICHE. I've changed the individual's name in respect of the place where we are. So Sam Siegel is a real chemical engineer, was working on a real project. He had spent about 5 years working with this company, and he was in the construction phase. They were building this facility. He was having to, pretty soon he would have to sign off and stamp the drawings for final construction. When Sam discovers that his colleagues, and indeed his manager, are involved in a criminal scheme to try to take used valves, sell them to the owner as if they are new, and pocket millions of dollars in profit themselves because of that. This really happened. And Sam had to decide, what do I do? Sam contacted not his manager, who was involved in this scheme, but his manager's manager, going over his head. An act that took bravery, courage, honor. And the senior leader in the company assured him that everything would be taken care of, that the situation would be resolved. Sam stamps his drawings, he goes about his business, and as soon as he's done doing that, he gets a call from the same senior leader telling him it's time for Sam to go. The senior leader was in on the scheme. Now, the story did end in the appropriate way. The plant was attempted to start up, did not pass its startup test. The used valves were a key reason. Lawsuits ensued. Sam supported the prosecution. And in the end, the engineering firm that Sam was employed with, the division of that went out of business. So takeaway from this. Yes, engineering's special, but engineering, like senior business management, like law, like accounting, like some other professions, we deal with issues that involve millions of dollars, that involve key pieces of value and capital for our owner and our client organizations. And we uncover many of the same ethical issues that some of these sister disciplines might come up against. And so if that's the first part of engineering ethics, how we might be the same as any other business that deals with a lot of money and a lot of resources all in the same place, I thought it might help for us to start talking about what do these sister disciplines do. So this is the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants. This is their code of professional ethics. It's 208 pages long. They have more lawyers than we do. It takes 19 pages of definitions before you get to the introduction. But if you read past that and get into the meat of it, you'll see there's a lot to it that resonates a lot, I think, for us. So these are some key words and how often those words appear inside the accounting code. And if you look at some of these keywords, I hope that you say, this is a lot of what is important to me as an engineer. That some of these words here are a lot of what you think about when you think about engineering ethics. In some ways, it's the same as what accountants think. If you want one more case study, this is the official ethics code for lawyers for Texas. It's a bit tougher to find. I think the vision is that you're supposed to hire a lawyer to find the ethics codes for lawyers, but I found one. And this is only 120 pages. And if you start looking at some of these same keywords, you'll see a lot of the same topics apply again and again and again. So start talking about one of those topics. Because just like an accountant or just like a lawyer, often an engineer is called to give advice. Give advice to your employer, give advice to your clients, give advice to the government or regulatory authorities. We are called upon to give advice. And to do that, our own code of ethics gives us some advice of how we should do that. One of the highest principles that we have is that we should always be truthful and objective in the advice that we give. Sounds simple, truthful, objective. And the key word here, I would argue, is objective. This is the definition of the Wiktionary, which if you ever want to play a really tough game of Scrabble, try using that as your reference dictionary. So objective being that you're trying to avoid conflicts of interest, trying to base your decisions on the facts. And there are a lot of ways that conflicts of interest can impact the work that we do. Sometimes they end up as front page news, where a conflict of interest is perhaps financially motivated. Perhaps it's even one that we can't see ourselves. That we, in the middle of our work, yes, we have these financial obligations with all these parties, but we think that we can rise above them. We think that we cannot be influenced by them. And we may think that until it gets a bit too far. That has happened to other professions, even senior people in other professions, even senior people in our professions. And so because of this, all the major ethics codes have a lot of language about financial conflicts of interest. And those might be the first type that you think about when you think about a conflict of interest. But it's not the only one. Conflicts of interest can also come from relationships. Personal relationships with people who are in the authority to make decisions, who are in the client organizations that we're giving advice to, who may gain or lose because of decisions that we make. Professional relationships in the same way that may influence the decisions that we make. And the Texas Engineering Code, which is what the first bullet point on there states, has some very clear language and very clear ground rules around relationships and ethics. The National Society of Professional Engineers has very similar language, which is in the second and third bullet points that I have up there. Trying to give some very clear guidance that the relationships with others can influence and make us be less objective than we would like to be. And again, this is something that may be hard for us to see when we're in the middle of a situation. But it's not the only way we can have a conflict of interest. Let's go back to our hero, Sam. So Sam is now conducting some research. Sam is gathering data to support a conclusion. And he has done a lot of work. Sam has a pile of data supporting his key conclusion. And he's writing up a research report based on that information. Of course, there's a couple of tiddly little pieces of information on the side that don't quite support that conclusion. And Sam wants to write the best report that he can. He doesn't want to dilute the thrust of his argument by including this side piece of information, so he just kind of leaves them out. This is a real case that went before the NSPE Board of Ethics. And if you step back from this, so Sam didn't lie. He didn't lie. His report was 100% truthful. Every piece of data he referenced actually happened. He just left a couple of things out. If you're looking at this and saying, well, this is so obvious, I would never be Sam. Well, think. Sam's background and the reason that he did this is that he just wanted to graduate. He wanted to get this over with. He wanted to write the best report that he could. He didn't want to spend all of this time defending these pieces of data that didn't quite support his conclusion. He wanted to write a really good report. His motivations were arguably positive. And professional scientists, professional researchers, people who are paid and trained for years and years and years about how to conduct ethical and objective research studies, they often fall into this trap. They fall into this trap enough that the sciences, and especially the social sciences, are in a bit of a crisis today, with studies that are having difficulty being replicated, in some cases because of issues like what Sam faced here. And so if you think that this can never happen to me, I would argue that if this situation can happen to people who spend their lifetime training to conduct research in process data, then it certainly can happen to us, people who have a bit less training in those areas. Actually, I'd go a step further. I would argue that every single time one of you or me completes an engineering analysis, we have a conflict of interest. Maybe it's a small one. Maybe it is so small that it doesn't even rise to the level that needs to be disclosed because it is inherently obvious to everybody in the room. But every time you complete an analysis, you have an interest in completing this as quickly as possible to get to your other work, an interest in making your client happy, making the recipient of your analysis, giving them the information that they're looking for, giving them the answer that they're looking for, giving them an answer that you won't have to spend a great deal of additional time trying to defend, giving them an answer that's popular and will be accepted easily. Maybe just getting this whole project over with so you can get on to the next one. You have all of these interests already. And those interests may be in opposition to your interest in being objective. Again, I would argue this occurs for every single one of us, every single time we complete an analysis. And so what do? The ethics codes give us a couple of tools in our toolbox to use in situations like this. The first tool is disclosure. Fundamentally, what disclosure is doing is you're giving information to a third party so that they can add their judgment to your own. You're giving information to the person making the decision so that they can help check you, so they can help make sure that these conflicts of interest haven't gotten the better of you. And the dictate to disclose is quite clear in all the major ethics codes, both the ones that are in the Texas laws and the ones that are in our profession's rules and bylaws and codes. In addition to disclosure, there's another tool in our toolbox. So both of these bullets are directly out of the AIChE Code of Ethics, and I would direct you to take a quick look at the second bullet. The code is asking us to seek and heed the critical review of our work, and also to offer objective criticism of the work of others. The ethics code is not just asking you to be critical, it is requiring you to be critical. Criticizing your colleagues in a productive and positive way is part of ethics. It's part of ethics. It is as much a part of ethics as being honest and truthful and objective and unbiased and all the other values that you might be thinking about. But criticizing each other to help keep each other in check is a part of ethics. In addition to that, listening to each other and working as a team, teamwork, is a part of ethics. And I would call both those pretty surprising conclusions. These teamwork, constructive, professional criticism, these are things that you may have walked into here thinking are good. You're glad that you do them. You're glad that your colleagues do them. You think they're positive and helpful for the work that you do. And they are all those. But they're also a key part of ethics in and of itself, and especially a key part of engineering ethics. So, another key value that appears both on all of our sister disciplines' codes, as well as our own, is competence. You see it on both for accounting and for lawyers, and you see it for ourselves. It's perhaps most simply stated in the AIChE Code of Ethics that engineers should perform professional services only in areas of their own competence. So, let's talk about an example that made this a bit challenging. Sam Seagal is a chemical engineer. He has no experience in buildings or facilities design or construction. And like many of you, he gets advertisements in the mail. And one of these advertisements got him excited. It said that there's this new computer software program. If you've never built a highway before, no problem. Just push this button, and it will tell you how, and it will take care of all the trouble for you. Never designed a building before? No problem. Well, Sam is excited. Sam buys the program. Sam begins to offer his services in facilities and construction engineering based on this program alone. It's almost funny, except it actually happened, and it actually happened to a chemical engineer. And you, again, may be looking at this and saying, yeah, no reasonable person, except maybe Sam, would ever do such a thing like this. But still, there are areas in our work that start to get closer to this than you might want to imagine. Let's paint a couple more pictures here. And maybe I'll do it by starting with another sister discipline. So, meteorology is a discipline like ours that has had great advances in computer technology over the last several decades. That very powerful computer models have come to the forefront and are a great tool to aid meteorologists, just like great computer simulations of all sorts are used by the people in this room every single day. And a small study by this psychologist was looking at meteorologists. And she looked at more senior meteorologists, ones who grew up and learned their discipline in an age where the computer models weren't quite so robust. And these senior people, when they had to do a forecast, would generally step back using their own competence and first principles, build up what they thought the forecast should be, and then they would check it against the computer. If they agreed, all was well. If there was a disagreement, they would go back and start to try to figure out what was different and why. The newer meteorologists would be more likely to just trust whatever the computer said. They would put the information in the computer, look at the results, and go with it. Now, so meteorologists, this is a fairly small study by a psychologist, but the concern here is that once the veterans retire, the human expertise to intuit when the computer might mess up might be gone. That the meteorologists may have lost that competence to really understand what is going on without the computer as a sidekick to help them do it. And they may have even lost the competence to really understand what is the computer even doing. Now, this had no real impact on public safety. It's a weather forecast. Some are right, some are wrong in any case. But there are cases where this has a bit more impact. In 2009, Air France Flight 447 left Brazil, headed to Paris. The airplane was flying at cruising altitude, fairly high altitude, and the airplane was perfectly operational. The engines were working fine, control systems were working fine, control surfaces were operational, and there were two well-trained, very competent pilots from one of the world's premier airline organizations were both sitting in the cockpit. Couldn't be in a better situation. The plane was flying level at high altitude. And because of the weather during that time, because of the altitude, the pitot tubes on the airplane, which are used to measure the airplane's speed relative to the air around it, we use the exact same device sometimes in pipe to try and measure the flow of a fluid through a very large diameter pipe. The airplane has the same thing to measure its own velocity, and these tubes iced over. So, no problem. Engine still works, control system still works, pilot's still awake, but the airplane lost this one signal for its velocity. And with the loss of that one signal, the autopilot turned off because the autopilot relied on this one signal to help it operate. Again, no problem. Plane is flying level, everything is okay. And you have two pilots in the cockpit who are well trained. They have worked in simulators and they have practiced takeoffs, they've practiced landings, they've practiced evasive maneuvers, they've practiced emergency situations, they've practiced all sorts of things. It's been a while since they practiced flying a plane in level flight, though. So why should they? I mean, the computer just runs it. It's all good. And with that lack of practice of level flight at high altitudes and trying to avoid a stall, these two very competent pilots managed to fly a perfectly good airplane straight into the ocean with everybody on board. And in the discussion afterwards, in the aftermath of the investigation, one piece that came out of that is that over the decades, airlines have had increasing automation functions, functions that have undoubtedly saved lives and made planes safer. But when trouble suddenly springs up and the computer suddenly can no longer take charge of what it's doing, many pilots may not have the experience, the competence to take control. Moreover, many pilots may not have the competence to know whether they have the competence to do this or not. They may not be able to judge themselves quite as well because the computer's always been there to help them. In this case, the plane stalled, it lost speed, and because it lost speed, that's what caused it to eventually rapidly lose altitude and crash into the ocean. So again, a case that may a case of that may strike a little bit home for some of us. So with all that, let's look back at our hero Sam. Now Sam's a structural engineer. He is designing buildings, and he has experience designing buildings for hazardous weather conditions in this part of the country. And so he goes off and designs a building, no problem. Unfortunately, Sam isn't aware that building codes have changed a little bit. He hasn't done as good a job as he could at keeping up with the research and keeping up with his own discipline. And so the building that he designs is destroyed by severe weather about a year after it's built. And it's destroyed in such a way that if he had followed the latest standards, the building would have survived. The National Society of Professional Engineers considered this not just improper engineering, but an actual ethics violation. That it is Sam's responsibility to keep his own competence up. It's Sam's responsibility to know his own competence and keep it current. To do the types of things that all of you have been doing today and hopefully will be doing tomorrow at the conference here, it is his responsibility as an engineer to both know his own skills and keep them current. So now none of these examples are of chemical engineers. But if you look at our own function, look at all the subdisciplines that we have within chemical engineering. You might be an expert in one area of engineering, but are you up to date with the latest safety systems, with the latest high-integrity shutdown system design procedures, with the latest advances in relief valve designs, with the latest advances in thermodynamics? And at the same time, are you, because of our high reliance on computers that we all have in the industry, do you have enough knowledge to be able to judge your own competence in those areas? Just like the airplane pilots didn't quite have that knowledge. It actually gets a bit worse. So about 20 years ago, two psychologists, Justin Kruger and David Dunning, conducted a series of studies. At their simplest, what they did is, and I'll explain what the graph is here on the left, they asked a group of college students to, first of all, rate how they would perform compared to their peers on a grammar test. And so they all put in how well they would do, or how well they thought they would do. And as you can see, they all thought they would score at about the 70th percentile level. And then he had them all actually take the test. And what he found is that the people who knew just a little tiny bit about the subject thought they knew a whole lot. You see the bottom quartile, people who actually scored in the 15 or 20 percentile of the group thought they would score in the 70th. But the people who, conversely, who really are experts at the subject, who know the subject so well that they know how much there is still to learn, they actually underrated their own skill. People who actually scored at the 100th percentile thought they would only score at the 60th or the 70th. These two psychologists repeated the same test in many different areas. They asked in areas as interesting as sense of humor. They asked people how good they would be at telling jokes. Incidentally, if you ever want to see a scientific paper with a scientific analysis of what makes a good joke, this one has it in it. And you can put that on the side because that might be a little bit more subjective. But in more objective areas, like grammar tests, like engineering skills, what these folks found is that humans are universally bad at judging their own skills. That the people who know a little bit about something and don't know all that there is yet to learn think they know the whole subject. And the people who really do know the whole subject, and because of that they know how much is still left to grow, underrate their abilities. So that puts us in a pretty challenging position. We as engineers are asked to judge our own competence. But because we're human, we're bad at doing that. From fundamentals, we just are. And because of the advent of computers, and because of these other factors around us, it may make it even more difficult. If you're looking for a guide, here's one that may be helpful to you. So I took this from the preface of one of Richard Feynman's books, Richard Feynman, the Nobel Prize-winning physicist. And this is from one of his colleagues describing Dr. Feynman's work. And it noted that Dr. Feynman was once asked by one of his fellow faculty members to try to explain a very difficult and esoteric physics concept. And Professor Feynman stepped back and said, okay, I'll prepare a freshman lecture on that subject. He backed up and he thought about it, and he came back a couple days later and said, you know, I couldn't do it. And because I couldn't deliver a freshman lecture on the subject, that means I really don't understand it. And that's a pretty fair guide for us to use. If you step back and you say, I would have trouble delivering a freshman lecture on the subject, building up from first principles up to the complex and esoteric and difficult things that you do every day. If you have trouble doing that, then maybe it's a calling for you to go back and check your own competence on the subject. Because one thing those freshmen will not accept is for you to say that the way you do this is type these 6 numbers in the computer and get the answer. But the freshmen won't accept that. They will require you to be truly competent in what you're doing. And I think that makes this a good test. So I'd like to add that to my list of surprising conclusions here, that self-doubt, that self-reflection is actually a part of ethics. One more piece about competence before I leave the subject. So, one more example with our friend Sam. Sam is now employed by a division of a very large corporation that does a whole lot of different things. And he's asked to move from his current division, where he designs one type of system, to a new division that designs a totally different type of system. Sam's never designed that new type of system. His organization knows that. He's very honest about that. And Sam's going to be working with a competent and qualified team of experienced people who will be training and teaching him in this new division. This is absolutely ethical. This is 100% ethical. The board ruled that this is not only ethical, but is a positive thing to do. Growing your own skills, it's not prohibited, it's permitted. It is encouraged. Growing your own skills is a good thing. It is an ethical thing, something that we should all do. And that does mean that we'll sometimes need to step out into new areas, but step out with proper supervision, control, checking, and assistance. So, that leads to one other piece. Both what Sam was doing in this last example and what his new supervisors were doing are also very much a part of ethics. Learning, mentoring is a part of engineering ethics. I imagine that most of you came here today to the conference and to the conference tomorrow hoping to learn some new things, to teach and learn from your colleagues, to grow your own skills and help grow the skills of your neighbors, and have an enjoyable and positive time doing so. And all that is good. But you could just as easily have said that you came down here for ethical reasons, that by learning, by mentoring, by teaching, that you are serving engineering ethics in those own functions. So if you want to view what you've done today and tomorrow as an ethical decision, as ethical activities, absolutely they are. Which makes me step back and think, why does engineering have a code of ethics at all? It might seem like an interesting question, but let's look at this. To the best of my knowledge, professional baseball does not have a code of ethics. It has rules. It has rules. You know, hitting the bat with the ball is good. Hitting another player with the bat, not good. It has lots of rules. But it doesn't have, it doesn't need a code of ethics. And I think the reason why is that even though most of us may not have the skills to play for the Houston Astros, the general public and the umpires do have the skills to be able to see very, very clearly who is winning, who is losing, who is playing fairly, who is not. That there can be umpires outside of the players who can look on the team and can judge whether they are playing and following the rules or not following the rules. I can't throw a baseball worth much of anything, but I can keep a scorecard. And there are many others like that who can keep tabs on the team and help make sure that they all stay and follow the rules. But engineering is different. Chemical engineering especially is different. We do such complex work that people outside of our discipline often can't understand what we do and how we do it. They can't be our umpires because they can't even understand what rules we are following and what rules we need to follow in the tasks that we do. Actually, to state that better, we, the engineers ourselves, we are the umpires because we are the only ones who can be the umpires of our own division, of our own discipline, of the own work that we do. There can't be somebody else outside of us keeping a scorecard and watching us. And that is why we have a code of ethics. The code of ethics is playing to us as umpires of our own discipline. It is telling us that we are closer to doctors than baseball players, that the public, our clients, they're placing their trust in us. And at the same time, they may have no idea what we actually do or how we do it. And they're counting on us to police ourselves. So, with that, there are several different codes of ethics for engineers. The National Society of Professional Engineers has a very nice 2-page code that summarizes all the major points. The state of Texas has a set of rules that's longer, but the key ethics provisions of that are also just a handful of pages. And if you go back and compare what these codes say versus the ones in our sister disciplines, you'll see there's a really key difference. Look at the bottom 2 lines. In the code for lawyers, the only time that health appears is that it notes that a lawyer needs to be in proper mental health to practice law. That's the only place that health appears in there. For the accounting code, the only place that health appears is that the code directs accountants to be ethical in the way that they account for health benefits in terms of overall economics. The very first line of every engineering ethical code notes that the public health and public safety are the reason for the code. Health and safety, the public health and safety, are the reason for our ethics code. They're the reason that we need to care as a profession. There is enough hydrocarbons flowing through the facilities that we help to control and manage and keep safe in just this general vicinity to make the equivalent of many nuclear bombs. We deal with systems that are at inherent risks to public health and safety. And the public is counting on us to help keep them safe. That is how we're different than law. That is how we're different than accounting. That's how we're different from any other profession. And I would argue that is how engineering ethics is different than any of the other codes of ethics that you might consider. One of the most succinct summaries of engineering ethics is from our own organization. The AIChE Code of Ethics is just about a page long if you print it out. It's not very long at all. And it succinctly summarizes all of the key points. If you're ever interested in reviewing and refreshing and keeping yourself up to date of codes of ethics, I would suggest this as a very good place to start. I've talked about most of these points. These 3 slides, this is the entire code of ethics from AIChE. It's very succinct. The one point I haven't talked about that I think I should is the second bullet on here, talking about, if you will, whistleblowing. The bar here is very, very high. It takes a fair bit of moral fortitude to do what Sam did in my very first example, and not just tell your boss that he's making a mistake or she is making a mistake, but tell your boss's boss or somebody even more senior in your organization. It takes a lot of courage to do that, but the second bullet point here says that that is our requirement to do that. It takes even more courage to tell a regulatory agency that may have the capability of finding your own company, or of telling your client organization or telling a government organization that there is something that you see that could cause public health and safety impacts. But the Code of Ethics has set the bar at that point that we must have that courage to do that. Most of these points here I've talked about, but the second point I want to talk about a little bit more, because I think this is interesting when you think about it. So, treating our colleagues or our coworkers fairly and respectfully, recognizing their contributions, this is the type of thing that most religions have at their core. Many government codes of ethics and values have at their core. Hopefully you and your personal values have at its core. But I think it's fair to sit back and say, what does this have to do with engineering? Yes, we should value our neighbors. Yes, we should value our colleagues. Yes, we should listen to them and respect them as people. But what on earth does that have to do with engineering? And I'd like to dive into that in a bit of detail, because I think this really is at the core of engineering ethics. Because if you step back from everything I've talked about here tonight, first I told you that engineers should be objective. But there are inherent conflicts of interest everywhere that face every action that we take. Conflicts of interest that may be difficult for us to see when we're in the middle of that situation. I've told you that engineers need to judge their own competence. But people have challenges doing that just because we're people. And moreover, people who work a lot with complex computer systems have even more challenges doing that. I told you that public health and safety rely on engineering ethics. But there are these inherent challenges for even the best engineers to uphold the code of ethics. And I've told you how important this subject is for the general public and for us. But because our work is so complex, there can't be an outside referee to help keep us in check. And so with all that, let me offer an analogy. This is Maria Spelterini, who was crossing Niagara Falls in 1876. She is wearing peach baskets on her feet because doing this any other way would be far too easy. And let me just take this example and apply a bit of engineering logic to something that I can understand as a chemical engineer. So we have a trained operator who is executing a certain procedure and following that procedure. We have a primary structural support. We have a couple of spectators, which we can just kind of leave on the side. And because we're a bunch of chemical engineers, we, of course, have a heat and material balance with a flow rate and approximate molecular weight. And I must be honest that that molecular weight does not include the rocks that both sit all around the flowing fluid and might be flowing inside of it as well. So we have this situation. And I believe, and I'm sure most of you believe, that operators are some of the most important and most intelligent people who we work with. Whether those people are operating laboratory scale equipment or operating big complex facilities, the operators know what they're doing. But if I was leading a HAZOP of the system, if you were leading a HAZOP of the system, I'm sure you would never allow it to pass. Because as much as we respect the operators, we would never leave an operator action alone to be able to have such dire consequences as this. We would step back in the HAZOP and we would say, how can we build a system around this operator to help support the operator? How can we build a system to help the operator in case they misstep? In case, not because they're a bad operator, but because they're human. What can we build around them to help them? And as chemical engineers, of course, we would make sure that the system went through a proper LOPA, that it was a proper SIL-3 system or something like that. We would build a net. We would build a net. And we would make sure that this net would be enough to catch the operator if the operator would misstep. So what happens when it's us on the tightrope? What happens when it's us on the tightrope trying to practice engineering ethics and even the practice of engineering, which is complicated and difficult and challenging? What is our net? What is there to back us up? And I would argue that that net is right here in this room. It is each other. That we are relying on each other to apply judgment when we cannot, to be that referee of ourselves, to help keep us practicing engineering in the way that we want to practice it. That we are relying on each other. That engineering is a team sport. If you don't believe me, just look at us. So before I get to that, I believe this is why the AIChE Code of Ethics, almost half of it is related to how we treat each other. Almost half of it is not related to numbers or simulations or anything like that. It's related to people and how we treat each other so that we can build this network to help keep ourselves strong. The popular view of an engineer is somebody working alone. This is Kitty Joyner in 1952 when she was working for the predecessor of NASA. And you often see a picture of an engineer like this, a lone person, alone with their calculations, doing their work. But by contrast, if you look at another profession, say lawyers, you often see them as a group, especially if they're in a hit TV show or something like that. And so there's this perception that there are these extroverted lawyers who are over there always talking to each other, and there are these introverted engineers who work alone. And it's not true. You know it's not true. Most engineers work for an organization of some sort, either in academia or in the industry. And even those who don't, those who do practice alone, have groups like AIChE, where we can work with colleagues and support each other. There are a lot more companies out there that are Sam Siegel, attorney at law, than there are Sam Siegel, professional engineer, trying to practice by themselves. And I think that's because we all realize that engineering is a team sport, that we need each other to support each other. In his preparation for the speech, James Turner reached out to the industry asking for some perception of what are the biggest ethical issues that we're facing today. Some people worry about having enough time and resources to pursue all the issues. You know, today we heard from Rick Engler from the U.S. Chemical Safety Board. He noted how chemical engineers need to be the watchdogs of others in our industry for safety. And having enough time to do that, enough time to practice engineering the way we want to practice it, is a concern. Some people see short-term decisions overshadowing long-term decisions. Some people see competitiveness in the industry being a challenge. That the need to meet schedule incentives or the need to work in a global environment with different value systems around the world playing a part. And the last point, the point that's coming into our speaker talk for the next year, talking about how our knowledge of environmental issues impacts us as a discipline, and how engineering can be a very big force for good and a very big force in the negative on that issue, and how we can handle that. The last point is extremely complex, and I'll leave that to the side. But the other points, I believe, there's an underlying factor that may be impacting all of those points. And let me quickly back into it as a final point here. Patents can be an imperfect way to judge innovation in an industry or novelty in an industry. But I'm an engineer and I like numbers, and so this is a good source of numbers that may help paint a story. I know that there's a lot of areas of our industry that are extremely innovative. We talked about some today, we'll talk about some tomorrow. But if you just look at the numbers, back in the 1960s, almost 20% of US patents were in the chemicals industry. And as the years have gone by, you see that number steadily decrease. One reason is fewer patents out of the chemicals industry. One reason is for a dilution, a rise in patents from electronics and other areas like that. And in some sense, I actually inflated these numbers a bit by picking the right years. 1973 and 1995 were both high water years in terms of chemical industry patents compared with the years around them. So the data very clearly paints a picture that there are portions of our industry that are maturing or are mature, that are not seen as novel as they were before. And I'm worried about that, because the exotic is something that often businesses want to give a lot of resources to. If it's exotic, we're worried. If it's exotic, we want a big team trying to solve it. If it's exotic, we want that team to spend a lot of time and effort to work on that. If it's routine, we want it done efficiently. We want it done fast. We want it done yesterday. If it's routine, we want to put pressure on doing it as efficiently as possible. Pressure that may be some of those pressures that we're seeing in the survey responses that I showed just a slide ago. And if you want one example of how this may play a part in our work, this is the final example I want to give tonight. This is out of the software world. MongoDB is a big data company. It's about a $4 billion company. And I really admire the person who wrote this post for being willing to put this issue and the exact details of it out to the public. Fundamentally, this software developer was making a change to the code, and this person built it, tested it, thought the code was perfect, released it out into production, and as soon as he did, the system stopped working. And all of his clients were obviously quite frustrated. For 24 hours, the system was down. He worked hard. He brought the system back up. Nobody was hurt. Okay. But a key piece is, how did this happen? And how this happened is that this person was looking at a new version of the Internet Protocol. I'm not going to try to make software engineers out of you all, but the background is that the Internet Protocol version 4 is tried and true, been around for decades, and there's a newer version, version 6, that's been rolled out over the last decade or so. And this software developer was very worried about the novel, the new version. And so he ran test after test after test against the new version, making sure it would work in every single permutation. And when it all worked, he said, that takes care of that, and rolled out the code. The code that, of course, failed with the version of the Internet Protocol that 90% of the world was using. So lesson, what was novel, what was new, was the place where he was worried, the place where he put all of his effort, the place where he put all of his concern, the place he put all of his testing. I am a bit worried that this might be happening to us that if our industry, or not all of it, but parts of it, are being seen as routine, that processing millions and millions of pounds of hydrocarbon and other flammable material and other hazardous material is seen as routine, then there might be pressure placed where it shouldn't be. And so, to conclude, I would like to say that whether novel or routine, what our discipline does can have major impacts on public health and safety. That the public is relying on us to keep them safe, to keep them healthy, to be watchdogs of the industries that we work within. That there's really nobody outside of chemical engineers who can help us with that responsibility. Nobody else really understands what we do to help police us as we do it. And that means that we are shouldering these responsibilities that are very difficult for any one person to handle alone. But we're not alone. And through teamwork, through our colleagues, through what we are doing here tonight and today and tomorrow and what you do back at your organizations every single day, we as a discipline can shoulder these burdens. We can carry forward with what the engineering ethics codes ask and require us to do. Thanks, and I'll take a few questions.
Thank you, Mark, for your presentation. Now we are going to open the floor for some questions. If you could please raise your hand, I'm going to come up to you and give you the microphone. We're going to have a limit of 5 questions.
So thank you, Mark, for that excellent presentation, and I fully agree that we are each other's safety net. I found it very interesting that you referenced the 2 sister professions to ourselves as engineers, being the legal profession and the accounting profession, both of which, unlike the engineering profession, have a much more strictly applied certification process. So I'm curious your view of the industry exemption that allows most of us to not have to obtain professional engineering certifications.
Yeah, and I guess I'll first say that it's not, I think the core reason why many chemical engineers practice without being professional engineers is that in many cases our deliverables don't go straight to a building board or a code board that has to look at them like a civil engineer would. And I think you do correctly point out another difference that is very fair of how we differ from some other groups. That that there's not a test. I mean, yeah, there's a professional engineering exam, but really a test, especially of all the sub details within chemical engineering. There is no test of that, and I don't think there's going to be a test of that, which really gets back to even more that is up to us to judge our own competence with that. I guess the one place where I'll take that to is whether you're doing work that would require a professional engineering license or you're doing work that does not require a professional engineering license. The work you're doing very possibly has very major public health and safety impacts. And so and for that reason, regardless of what the law says, what the law does not say, I think what most of us take to heart is that these basic principles apply to us regardless of what the law says. Certainly the STS-AIChE says that in its rules and bylaws, but I would argue that so I'm agreeing with what you're saying, but I'm also saying that it may not matter in practice in how we actually do our work.
So if we can't trust our own opinions of our own competency, is there a better way of gauging that competency?
I guess the place I would go back to is again leaning on each other for a bit of that. That is also, to step back, this difficulty judging our own opinion of ourselves isn't just something that applies to engineers, it applies to everybody. That's one reason I try pulling some examples from far afield of our own discipline. And the best conclusion of all of those is that we may be better judges of each other than we may be of ourselves, and to take advantage of that.
I did want to say that I saw a baseball ethics issue last week when the Cubs were playing the Rockies and the runner from second to third turned a tag out into a hug, therefore obstructing a double play. But, and they didn't call it an obstruction. I thought it was a hug-struction, however you say that. Why was the changing of departments situation brought to the ethics review board if it turns out that it wasn't an unethical situation?
Yeah, so I'm not sure how the case was brought to the board. That the board does publicize some genericized versions of the cases as an educational tool, which is what I use for some of the examples here. That information does not have the basis of how that case was brought to the board. It simply has the board's opinion. But much like the U.S. Supreme Court offers opinions, and those opinions, it gives some reasons why as guidance for lower courts to use, the NSP Board of Ethics offers those opinions as well as guidance both to the state boards and to ourselves. And the reason for publishing that case was to offer the guidance that tackling a stretch assignment is not necessarily an ethical breach. That doing that type of thing is well within what we should all be thinking about doing if we do it right. So I'm not sure how the case was brought there, but what I want to try to pull from it is the conclusion out of it.
Any other question?
So question for you. If I remember right, you showed the keywords in the different documents, and safety was shown one time, I think, in each application, law, and accounting. Is that correct?
About that,
Okay.
yes.
Now, question on that is that, is ethics a matter of being sued or not being sued protection-wise, lawyer-wise? Because if you look at the Fortune 500, CEO's message to the shareholders, the word safety is in 92% or more of every keynote of every CEO's message to the shareholders. So what's missing? Why is safety so important to the CEOs of corporations, to the shareholders, and yet only shows up one time in both applications? What's missing?
I think it comes to what is the core reason for existence of these different groups. So when the lawyers look at themselves and try to think, what are we here to do? We're here to give impartial advice to people, is my interpretation of that. And I'm not a lawyer and don't have anything against or for anything of these other professions. I'm not trying to make any value judgment there. But when engineers look at ourselves and say, what do we do? And why does it matter that we care about ethics? The very first statement that comes up is the health and safety impacts, the public health and safety impacts, which are so obvious. If you do step back from it, if some of our sister professions give bad advice, even the medical profession gives bad advice to a person, it can adversely affect the health of that person. If we give bad advice, it can adversely affect thousands of people. And that weight, I think, is just very deep and inherent in our profession, and should be. It really should be. Yeah. So with all that, I think it's very positive that many of the organizations that we work for at a business level have adopted safety as a core value. We're certainly not trying to keep it as ours alone, right? We want them to do that. And actually, I think it is, in many ways, because of people in engineering who are pushing the importance of that is helping to bring our organizations along. And I value our profession for everything that we've done to help do that. Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks very much. I appreciate your attendance. And I'll certainly stick around at the end if you want to talk anymore. Thanks.
Great presentation. Now, just to wrap up, thank you everybody for your attention. I hope to see some of you tomorrow during our technical sessions. Make sure that you guys get your certificates in case you want the professional development hours. Okay, we have many activities coming up, so please stay tuned so that way we can count with you in the future. Thank you. Have a great night.